Okay, so we've talked about numbers. We talked about points, which are nice little discrete points in space defined by three numbers. So let's move on to curves. And so what you'll see here, there's just in the Rhino native environment, I have several different types of curves. Of course, this one's a straight line. I would include lines as a subset in a larger set of curves. This is a polyline, right? This is actually the same curve as the polyline, just with a different degree of curvature. So this is a third degree curvature, this is first degree curvature. And so what you can see is that maybe sometimes curves can be rebuilt, sometimes they can be straightened out or made smoother. This is a freeform curve, but it's planar, so it sits in the XY plane. This is a freeform curve that I created that it's moving in all three directions at once, like a roller coaster track or something like that. Or like the trajectory of a jet fighter or something. So just to give you a little better sense of some of the things we're going to be doing here, let's talk about the properties of curves, and we'll do that by actually manipulating them in Grasshopper. I'm going to go ahead and type in Grasshopper, open this up. Okay, and so this is an example file called curve length. But one of the things we need to do, and I'll just start, I'll close this and start a new graph here. One of the things we need to do is we have some geometry in Rhino that we want to use in Grasshopper, right? So let's say we want to build parametrically off of this line. And so what we need to do is to create a widget that references this line that's in Rhino. We need to create a widget in Grasshopper that references it. So I'm going to go to Parameters tab, and under Geometry, you can see all the different types of geometry that Rhino and lots of other modelers use. One of them is called curve. So I'm going to use curve. And so what this is a little placeholder widget. And I can right click on it. And I can say set one curve. And what happens when I click on that, set one curve, Grasshopper disappears. And it's telling me to select a curve in Rhino. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click this line. Okay, and now you can see when I highlight or select the curve widget that this line also highlights green, meaning that it's selected. Okay, and so now I'm referring to this line in Rhino, I'm referring to it in Grasshopper, and I can start to build off of it. So there's a number of things I can do with lines and curves. I can measure their length, I can add points along them, I can divide them up, etc. So great timing. So anyway, let's get going. I'm going to go to the curves tab. And there's a number of different ways I can create curves in Grasshopper. But right now, let's take one that's already existing in Rhino and let's start doing things with it. And you can go to the analysis tools. And so one of the things I can do is take a curve and figure out what its length is, right? Okay, and so all this does is spit out a length. What does it need? It needs the curve to measure. I'll go ahead and plug that in. Okay, and so this is telling me that the length of this curve is 57.71573 units long. Okay, let's say I want to find the start and end points of this curve. There's a tool for that. I plug in the curve, and look, now it's added a start point and an end point. Okay, and so if I have a curve and then I need to get the start point, for instance, as an ingredient for something else later on, I can do that, right? And so we can begin to take curves and begin to build other curves and points along them. I think that's really useful because that's how we'll start to build trusses and things like that. So let's see, I can do points, I can do, okay, so here's another really important thing, okay? This one's called evaluate a curve, okay? We evaluate curves at their T parameter. So let's talk a little bit about the nature of curves, right? So if you think about, this is the easiest way I've been able to sort of explain this, okay? You know, any curve, whether it's a straight line or a planar curve or a non-planar curve, if you can think of it as maybe like a road or a street, right? I can move back and forth along it, right? And as I do so, I can identify, let's say, street address along this road, right? And so each line or curve has a street address, right? And so the beginning of the curve, the street address is 0, and the end of the curve, the street address is 1. So halfway along it, the street address would be 0.5. a quarter of the way along it, the street address would be 0.25. Okay, and so whether this is a straight line or a curved line, right? We call that address a T parameter. Okay, and so I'm going to go ahead and plug this curve in, and I'm going to do something funny here. I'm going to right-click and tell it to reparameterize the curve. Okay, now don't worry, I'll explain this better, and we'll repeat this command numerous times. Okay, but what that reparameterization does is it tells Grasshopper to reparameterize the minimum and the maximum street address along that curve to 0 and 1. Okay, and that makes finding different t values much easier. Okay, now I'm going to use a number slider to identify a t parameter. And so what this is going to do is it's going to locate the street address 0.25 along this curve and populate that address with a point. Okay, and so as I move the t parameter and it change its value, I move the street address that we're looking for, let's say 0, so now the start of the curve, all the way to 1, which is the end of the curve. Okay. All right, and so now we've placed a point along a curve.